right. Good afternoon. My name is Douglas Kellner, co-chair. With me is Peter Kaczynski, Gregory Peterson, and Andrew Spano, our commissioners. We will begin with the minutes, approval of the minutes of the last meeting. I understand that the executive minutes were redone last night.
Just that one word that you had.
And the other changes that.
I had some changes yesterday.
Right. So this includes.
And I told Donna to give you a copy, right? You got them?
I did.
So this includes both sets of changes.
Correct.
All right.
Are we taking them separately or together?
Why don't we take them together unless those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the minutes are approved. We'll then turn to the unit updates. We'll start with Bob Brem and Todd Valentine, the co-executive directors.
Well, there were a number of meetings that we've held. Mostly we survived the budget process. I guess is the good news. The bad news is it's the same rate as last year. One item that was helpful to us in order to pay for the legal ads we have to run this fall. The executive budget proposal had transferred some money from our technology fund to our NPS fund. That should help us to pay for the legal ads for the two amendments that we know of so far.
NPS fund is what?
Non-personal service. Right. So the legal ads would fit into that, and depending on the wording of the legal ads, it in the translation and all the languages, it could be substantial. So at the present time, we have the constitutional question of whether or not we should have a convention, and the second one is the forfeiture of a pension for certain state public servants. Those are the two that are currently out there. We notified the Attorney General's office early in January and February of the need for the Attorney General to opine what the form of the question and the abstract, which should make it easy for the Attorney General this year because the form of the question for the constitutional issue is in the Constitution, so it's only the abstract they have to write. But we still haven't heard from them. So once we get that, then John and others can actually get price estimates, which are pretty much dependent on number of words that we have to publish. So that's moving along. We did get some of the funds reappropriated from the technology. I know the IT department has been talking to us for about a year as to the help we needed to get in the building. They're pretty much all here. Been working very well with the IT department and a group of us that meet weekly to try and estimate when we will have the various upgrades done. I know when William first came, he was thrown into the deep end. It was a busy election season, and all the cybersecurity for the general election had been raised, so we spent a lot of time on that, plus putting the team in place. He's interviewed a lot of people, put together a lot of staff, and I can't say with certainty what date we'll be able to plug everything in, but we are more certain than we've been in a long time that very soon we'll have it mapped out for you. So that's taken a lot of time in that period of time, but the technology fund, this year's budget reappropriated the unexpended money. I think that will help us to finish the technology planning, pay the bills, and to make up for that little bit of money they took out of the technology fund to put into the NPS to pay for the legal ads. So I think budget-wise, it's not great. It's not what we had asked for in the supplemental budget for the extra positions, but it's something I think we can live with from a budget point of view. The other is yesterday we did the kickoff meeting for the with Nysboe, which is the group we've hired to help us to do some the cyber risk assessment work. I think that's going to be helpful for us to at least put a plan in place and map what additional security measures, if any, we need to make sure that the voting systems, the voter registration systems, and the election night reporting systems are secure and safe. So the first step is to do a risk assessment of both the state systems and the County Board of Elections systems, and then map out what future changes need to be done, whether it be direction, regulation, or purchases. So I think that's very helpful that it's finally up and moving. You have voted in the past for authorization for the spending of the money and for the contracts, and now they're actually meeting, and we hope to have a major part of the assessment, which will be the county boards of elections, done first. And we hope to roll that out just before the June conference, by the time we get the list of questions and the meetings with the counties. So that gives us an idea of when that one's going to happen. Other than that, I think that covers the high level.
Yeah, and related to the conference, we got the notice about the upcoming County Election Commissioners Association Conference, June 20th through 23rd. So we need to start. And we, as always, we are on the agenda for a variety of things. Usually the legal updates, petition. They're going into their own petition cycle, so they'd like a review of that sort of process. So we'll be planning on getting the budgetary approvals in place for that, and finalizing who's doing what at the agenda and who's actually going to go. Because unfortunately, that also dovetails with the end of the legislative session. So then election law bills tend to come out at the very end, so that may take some of our time. So we have to be mindful of that.
Any questions?
Okay.
All right, thank you. The councils, Kim Galvin and Brian Quayle.
Thank you. We have had a busy period since the last meeting of the commissioners. Several of the items that are on the agenda today, in terms of the three draft regulations, obviously involved a lot of time and attention of the unit. The unit continues to be actively involved in 10 matters of litigation. We received one new lawsuit since the last meeting in relation to village nominating petitions and language that is contained on there, the potential for that language not to be constitutional. We had two very productive meetings with Enforcement Counsel and her staff with respect to a very important issue of identifying and dealing with dormant committees. The training unit of the board's compliance unit will begin this year's training round on May 2nd. And at this point, some very substantial revisions have been worked on with for the handbook, reflecting the substantial changes in the election law that occurred over the course of the last year with respect to IEs, treasurer removal, and the instances of where the committee funds have to be dispensed within a certain period of time after the death of a candidate. So all of those revisions are nearly done, and we are literally at the 99.9% mark on that. The compliance reviews, obviously with the filings in January, bringing in quite a slew, have occupied a lot of energy in the compliance unit, bringing the total number of reviews up to 71,819, with 64,125 of them having been completed. The legislative over-contribution audit is essentially finalized and will be in its final form imminently. Kim and I are very pleased to report that our annual report was provided to PIO along with our internal controls, a report as well. The election law book, Kim is going to disclose what color it's going to be. It's going to be the big tell.
That's my favorite part of my job, picking that color.
Is out imminently and should reflect all changes in the statute through the April budget process. The IE regulation that you adopted on a permanent basis at the last meeting will be published on the 26th. And will be effective permanently, so we'll move from the emergency category to the permanent category. The election law update, which came out in April of last year, is on target to be completed by the end of this month also, and generally makes its formal publication, although we do send it to the county boards as soon as it's completed. We provide copies of it at the conference. The election commissioners conference in the summer. And one of the things I do want to point out is that, the March 10th, January periodic number of referrals in terms of non-filers was 2,105. And that was sent over at about the time of the last meeting on 3/10/17. As of this morning, 1,947 of those non-filers have not filed, which is roughly 92.4%. And that's it for me. Okay.
I don't have anything to add other than the last lawsuit that he talked about with village elections. There was a bill that passed both houses of the legislature that would alleviate our issue that hopefully the governor will sign and take that lawsuit away. And I believe there was 2 hollow complaint hearings since the last meeting, perhaps, that Nick and Bill took part in and I formulated drafts for.
So we're up to how many in total?
There have been 7 determinations altogether, or 6 determinations, 1 pending.
And I think that's all I had to add to Brian's report.
One minor question. Is there any reason we should not put the election law update online in the election law section of the website?
I don't think there's any reason not to do that.
Before it's final?
I don't know when
No,
it's
when
final.
it's final.
Oh, yeah, when it's filed, yeah, we plan to do that, I think.
I don't think we've been doing it.
It's on the portal for the counties.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think it's on the website.
Okay,
But we certainly can. I don't see any reason.
I don't see any reason why we couldn't.
As long as we
As long as
provide
it's screen readable.
caveat, screen readable and caveats that it's not legal advice, you have to put everything in.
Sure.
Okay, great, thank you. So next we have election operations. Anna's not here, so we'll have Brendan Lavelle.
Thank you. We've continued with the meetings with IT, with Capus Vitus, certified the JD. There was an additional vacancy, I think within the past 2 weeks or so. All the shoebox extensions have been sent out to the counties, and most recently Dominion submitted an application for a new scanner for their central count that we're going to be looking at as well. And short and sweet.
Great. Any questions? All right, then public information, John Conklin.
Thank you, Commissioner. We've been somewhat busy since the last board meeting. We're, always fielding inquiries regarding campaign finance filings, the 2 special elections. There have been some questions. We completed 48 FOIL requests in May. Tom and I participated in the monthly ECA call in March. We participated in the risk assessment kickoff meeting yesterday also. As Brian mentioned, the annual report is close to completion. I'm still waiting for 1 unit outstanding. And if that comes in, I should probably be done by the next board meeting. We should probably have it ready for the next board meeting. Tom has circulated draft forms for the special ballot for emergency responders for comments within the agency here. He's also made information available to the counties and to the staff with regard to the federal voting assistance program's proposed changes to the federal postcard application. and also the FWAB. On the website, we've posted the legislative packet for 2017, the filings that we've received for the May 23rd special election in the 9th Assembly District, the campaign finance seminar schedule. One thing that we did that should have probably been reported at the last board meeting, there were some changes to the absentee ballot application with regard to the language around Veterans Administration hospitals. There were some minor changes that the legislature put in effect last year that we've updated into the application, so that's been posted online and the changes made to the form. It's very minor, but just wanted to make everyone aware of that. Since the March board meeting, Greg and Patrick have visited the Genesee, Erie, and Herkimer boards for nice voter reviews, and Greg also did an MVR training in New York City for Adult Protective Services on March 20th.
Any questions? Information technology, Bill Cross.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'll start with the projects first. In terms of Capus Vitus, as I reported last month, we've been successful in filling several of the items we've had long outstanding, including a project manager. We're still, however, in dire need for 2 additional developers. We're been contingent on obtaining sub-allocation of funds back from ITS to fund those positions. ITS made it a requirement that we provide a project plan and a budget for that purpose before they'd sub-allocate funds, which we have done and have provided to them. I've received some follow-up questions this week. So that's moving. I'm hopeful that will come through because those resources are really needed. They're one of our big remaining unknowns for the project. That said, we have been making significant progress. A lot of the feedback we received from the board and the steering committee in terms of interface and scrolling and things along those lines, we've come up with solutions for to basically eliminate a lot of that horizontal scrolling and to streamline interface and particularly target it so it's useful on small screens like tablets and phones and such. So that was a good amount of work, but I think in the long run it will pay off and have it accessible as well. We also changed in terms of how we do some of the analysis for the project. With the new project manager on board, we've switched to doing something called use cases, which really outline who are the users of the application, what specifically they want to do, and a path through the application, and based on that, do our development targeted to specific users and their roles and what they need to accomplish. We've gone through, at least in terms of candidate management, and done that analysis for about 75% of that. So that's some significant progress there. Like I said, we still need developers to develop these pieces now that they have the analysis done, and we're still trying to move forward on that front. We've also had some continued development in the EFS module and data conversion, and IT has continued to work with compliance to make some additional enhancements to the new case management piece of that, with the system that we had rolled out previously. For Nysboe, much of our effort this month has gone into, as reported last month, we went through an assessment phase with the vendors to look at all our infrastructure, both here and at the data centers, and some of the work that was done by prior vendors. They did a significant deep dive into that and identified several, I'll call them deficiencies, in terms of what was originally planned for the project versus what was actually implemented, or how it was implemented correctly versus incorrectly. And we've since developed action plans to address each of those issues. It does require some significant reconfiguration and some new equipment to do that and supplement what was not implemented before. We've assembled a bill of materials for new equipment and software, and we have a resolution before the board for some of those costs of implementing that. That said, the overall project for Nysboe, is running somewhat behind from what it was originally expected. This refresh was supposed to be done some time ago, long before my arrival. That said, we're still significantly under budget on the original projected cost, which is good, even with the additional requirements of cybersecurity that have been more prevalent in recent future, that we're trying to work into both Campus FIDAs and Nysboe. The move and military overseas voters application, we've also begun development in-house for that. It's currently hosted externally. One of the conditions for renewing that contract was that we would redevelop it in-house and become self-sufficient in that. We've started that effort, and that's moving along well. We're on track for that. Cybersecurity, we continue to make significant improvements to existing systems. As I said, we did several short-term things just prior to election. Some of the longer-term things we're now addressing. One of the things in particular, I mentioned we're working a lot of that into existing projects that weren't originally planned for. We're also researching third-party monitoring. We have a lot of equipment that gives us a lot of information in terms of like intrusion detection and things along those lines. And keeping on top of that kind of volume of data is a significant burden. We're looking at some third-party monitoring solutions for that. Well, they'll review, and sometimes in an automated way, and look for certain patterns and just provide us with information back in terms of here's what's actionable, here's what we see here, and they pull together information they see from several other sources that are useful. So there's several vendors that perform that service, and we're looking into some of those to improve security, but also reduce the resources it takes in-house to do that. Bob mentioned we contracted with NYSTEC to do elections risk assessment. We're beginning first with the counties and a questionnaire, at least for the first part of it. Based on the results of that, we almost I had some follow-up with that. Also included in that scope is a risk assessment for BOE, our systems. We're scheduling that last as a confirmation of the new infrastructure that we're building out now to reassure that it's done to certain standards rather than analyzing what we currently have in place. And that is scheduled through, I think, December, January timeframe. Website analytics I've included in the report. Pretty much normal traffic there based following the general election. And that's what I have.
Thank you. Any questions? Enforcement, Lisa Sugarman.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. As Brian said, we had 2 meetings with my staff and Kim and Brian and Bob and Marie to discuss not only the dormant committees but other issues that both of our divisions work on. We also talked about the new handbook, and we asked if we could review it, and Brian said that would be no problem. So I anticipate that we'll be given a copy of the handbook so that we could look at it. On April 4th, I drove out to Batavia, and I met with the Region 6 commissioners. I had a very nice meeting with them. I wanted to talk to them about what I do and what they do and how we could work together to bring more committees into compliance and how we can work together to do that. So it was a very good meeting. I thought that they learned a little bit about what I do and what my division does and how we could work together. So it was a long drive in the rain, but I thought it was a good meeting, and I would like to meet with all of the divisions if they're listening and they would like to invite me to one of their meetings. But I think that it would be beneficial for all of the committees across the state and all the commissioners, if we could work together to get all the committees into compliance. We continue to work on our investigations, and I will get John my report before the next meeting. So you'll have your report by the May meeting?
Good.
Thank you.
Any questions? All right. Next item is to turn to old business, and we were
Could I just add one more thing?
certainly.
That anybody within the sound of my voice that is supposed to file a financial disclosure form that hasn't received an email from Jacob yet, please see me. Unless you're in the enforcement division. I don't do them. But anybody here that can hear me.
Within the agency.
Within the agency, right.
Not elsewhere, right.
I had a little trouble, with Mr. Cross, but I think we straightened it out.
I'm ethical now.
Okay, all right.
You've always been, but now
Yeah.
you're in
Certified.
compliance.
All right. So the first matter for old business was to continue the discussion on automated audits. There's nothing new on our side. Do you have any comments?
You're looking at me.
Yes.
Well, I think we should continue to try to resolve this. I totally agree. I guess I just have a comment that, as I understand the proposed rule or regulation from your side, is that we need to have different vendors servicing a county for purposes of their precinct-based machines versus their audit machine. Is that a fair?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so tell me exactly what the separation needs to be.
Right, the statute requires that the audit be done with independent software.
Okay, fair enough. So what does that
Okay,
mean as
so
far as
that
you're
means
concerned?
that you can't use the same election management system
Okay.
for the audit as you used for the original voting machine. It's not vendor specific.
Okay.
If the vendor has an independent software, it can be.
So the
used.
same vendor could produce two different softwares, and one could be used for precinct, one could be used for auditing.
Correct.
Okay. So I guess my next one, I think this all turns on this whole independent aspect to the system. So I guess I have a question about if the, let's say the county were to decide to engage in this and they were to go out and purchase another software to do the auditing. At the board, the programming is done for purposes of precinct based machines and then the audit machine. Do different actors have to be involved in the development or the aspect of, servicing that software at the board?
Our regulation doesn't require it, but that's.
I mean, does that compromise the independence then of the audit system vis-a-vis the precinct system?
Perhaps.
I mean, I don't notice that issue being addressed in the proposal, so I'm
It
wondering if it
isn't.
should be, if it has to be, how that would work.
It isn't addressed in the proposal, but certainly be happy to review any language if you want to.
Well, I guess the question really is, I'm not looking at language, I'm looking at the concept. Is that something that would be necessary to
Well,
ensure the independence of the audit system?
You have to identify the risk. If you have the same people programming the machines and who are programming the audit, is there a risk that if those persons were bad actors, that they would be able to successfully cover up the compromise of the system? That's so I'm not sure of the answer to that, but that's the risk that you would have to identify and see if you're actually addressing that risk in the audit.
So are you suggesting that would need to be something that's part of the regulation, or it would be done at the county level, they would do their own risk assessment of that at the county level, and then they would make the determination.
I think that's something we should be addressing, the risk assessment.
Okay, well, I think we need to look at that. I mean, it seems to me that is not addressed here, and, you know, as I've talked about this to people, about the independent aspect of this audit system, I'm trying to understand what constitutes independence, how far we have to go to ensure true independence of these systems. So the insurance of the different software would be that the same software is not auditing itself. I assume that's the point of having different software. So if a vendor developed different software from their precinct-based machine, that would be okay because it's different software that would be auditing, even though it's the same vendor.
Right.
So then I guess it's whether the independence then has to occur in the programming of the software. And I guess, I mean, that's one aspect. I don't know if there are any other steps in the process of creating a ballot and then auditing a ballot that would also have to be addressed as far as this independent. You know, I think when you're doing a hand count, the advantage, I guess, is that even if the same actors are, you have other actors there. I mean, the you know, transparency of that is different because you'll have people in the room.
You're looking at the original.
And I mean, you may have the same
Right.
election inspectors doing the counting, but you have other actors watching it, so there's a transparency that I think people are comfortable with. You won't have that when you do an automated audit. So the independence has to occur outside of a transparency, really, and occur in another way.
Correct, precisely.
So it's a question of how much and what and how and what form does that take.
Right.
So it seems to me before we adopt anything, we need to address this personnel issue on a
Fair.
programming level.
Fair enough. Brendan, is this something that you and Bob Warren and the rest of your team can take a look at?
Sure.
Report back to us? Because I think that's the key. The key
It
is
is.
that you,
It is.
I mean, the purpose of the audit is to make sure that the vote was accurately counted.
Right,
And,
that there's little or no opportunity for anybody to do anything that would be untoward.
right.
And then the purpose of the continued hand count, maybe you could just address that for a minute.
Well, even if you use an automated tool, you still have to check that the automated tool is functioning properly. And the statistics show that you only need to check a very small number of the ballots against the audited ballots, but you still need to do some check to make sure that the audit is functioning properly.
Okay. Now, in this context,
Bottom line, we've agreed conceptually, so I think now it's a matter of putting together the final touches to this, so that, again, we ensure transparency and accuracy.
Great. So Brendan, we'll turn to you and the folks in the elections operations to just work through the issues that we've talked about today and come back with another draft. All right, then we'll turn to new business. First is the proposed publication for comment of the amendment to Part 6201 on the Fair Campaign Code. So this is just to publish it for public comment. Does anybody want to discuss this?
I know we got some comments from Risa. I don't know if she wants to
Sure.
discuss those here. I just got them really this morning, but
Yeah, I had given some comments on Monday. It seems to me that, and I may be wrong, that the amendments seek to place the 1984, opinion number 1 of 1984 into the regulations. I don't agree, and I don't think that this is what should be done with the regulations. I think that the regulations that set out the Fair Campaign Code in section 6210.1 subdivision C, which specifically prohibits the deliberate misrepresentation of the contents or results of a poll relating to any candidate's election. By allowing a candidate to publish, or, I mean, a candidate obviously is free to publish any part of the results of a poll that he or she commissions, but to allow a candidate to only then post with the board those results of the poll if, in fact, there are other results of the poll that are contrary to the published results. So that, for example, if the poll says that my candidacy shows that I am ahead by 50 or 60% in opposition to my opponent, and yet other questions show that the respondents say that, in fact, there are other results of the poll that, in fact, show that I am not leading, and I am, in fact, either closer than 50-50 or 40-60. And I don't publish those, or I don't release those to the press, and the press don't publish those, and therefore I only file with the Board of Elections the results that I release to the press. I mean, I hate to use what we have here in the press now of fake news, but that's what the results of the poll that are released to the press is. It's fake news. You're releasing only the good parts of the poll, and then you're filing with the Board of Elections only that which is released. So the public never gets to know what the entire poll says, and it misleads the public to believe that the poll results for the candidacy shows that that individual candidate is in fact ahead, when the complete poll shows that the candidate, when more information is provided to the respondents of the poll, is in fact either tied or not leading at all. And I think that if you allow by regulation to allow a candidate to post with the Board of Elections only that which was released to the press and which is misleading the public, you are allowing the candidate to continue that misinformation to the public. I don't think that that's what the board should be doing, and I don't think that that's what the Fair Campaign Code was designed to do. I don't think that the language, I don't think that that's what opinion number 1 of 1984 was designed to do. I don't think that that's what it meant when it said only that information that was released to the press was needed to be filed. I don't think that's what the board had in mind when that question was answered in the series of questions that were asked and the resulting information was given. I think that if you allow that to be done, it's not a fair campaign code. It's allowing, again, that the candidate can support the fake news that was released by the candidate in the poll information that was released.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
I tend to agree with you, by the way.
Thank you.
What would you suggest? Would you suggest what you presented the last time when we had this poll issue, looking through the entire poll and picking out all the questions?
I think the entire,
Give a fair look at negative and positive?
I think that if a candidate releases a poll to the press, the entire poll should be published. I think that if a candidate is going to release information to the press, I think the public has and certainly the opponent has the right to see the entire poll. I think that a candidate can't pick and choose what information they want, well, obviously, I'm sorry, they can pick and choose what information they want to the press. I don't think that they should be allowed under the Board of Elections fair campaign code when the code specifically prohibits the deliberate misrepresentation of the contents or results of a poll relating to the candidate's election, that the board should say that we will further that misrepresentation to just file with the board that limited amount of information.
I just, yeah, let me just, for a minute. So, you're referencing the opinion from '84 as far as what you're taking issue with. I think that opinion was trying to get at a situation where a poll may cover several different aspects of a campaign. It may, for example, cover several different candidates. There may be a poll done that covers, a gubernatorial candidate, a Senate candidate, assembly candidate, all kinds of candidates. And it may end up we're in a situation, say, the assembly candidate, in the context of that poll, says to the press, we just ran a poll and I'm way ahead by 50 points. And so our opinion then says, well, then you have to release the questions in that poll that support what you've just said to the press. So I think what the opinion was trying to say, you don't have to release the whole poll. You don't have to tell what the questions were about the governor or about the congressman or about the senator, but you have to release the poll results relating to your race, because you've said that your candidacy is 50% ahead, then we want those poll results that support that.
Okay.
So I think in that context, the opinion was getting at the whole poll doesn't have to be released, but that portion that relates to you, that supports your contention that you're ahead by 50 points, have to be released.
But but when we go back to what happened in the hearing and the Jones poll, that's not what happened here.
That may be, but I mean, I think that's a difference. So I think there's no situation or in all contexts where a release of a poll is made, the whole poll has to be released, I think is overstating, because I don't think it's appropriate for, in the situation I said.
I can see that situation.
So I think, this regulation is intended to get at having polls released that allow the public to know whether or not the contention made by that candidate is backed up by the poll results. I think the example you gave, there would be a requirement for release of information that may go against what the candidate says.
But I don't believe the language that's in the regulation deals with that situation, because preparatory questions may not deal with the questions that deal with the candidacy of that in the situation that you give, because if the questions that are, for example, if you're given more information about the particular candidate and that causes the those who are responding to the poll to change their responses, then that might not be preparatory in the language that is dealt with here, because it's more information that's given about the candidate that causes the respondents to change their minds. So if you're asking about how do you feel about Risa Sugarman running against somebody else?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is 60-40. And then you say, well, what if you find out A, B, and C about Sugarman and D, E, and F about her opponent?
Mm-hmm.
And then that tightens the race. And then you find out X, Y, and Z about Sugarman and L, M, N, O, P about her opponent. And then that switches the percentages of the race. Now, those aren't preparatory questions about what's released about Sugarman 60 and her opponent 40.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not dealt with here, but that changes.
I don't agree with you, because I think it says to the extent the results of such questions were disclosed. The questions you're enumerating all relate to whether or not Sugarman is ahead 60-40.
But again,
So to me, all of those questions would have to be released. And some questions, if you, as you're suggesting, if you delineate more specifically on the candidate's qualifications, those numbers may change. Well, then that, I think, would be covered.
But all I
they're
can
still
do is
going
go by
to.
experience of what happened.
Well, I think each case stands on its own, though. I mean, I don't think you can take one example and try to extrapolate out that that's the rule. I think every fact pattern is a little bit different, and we have to analyze each poll and each release as it arrives and look at the release and then compare it to the poll and make a judgment call of whether the release matches the questions in the poll as far as percentages, numbers, and how the poll was represented in the public release. The preparatory issue was gotten to because I think there's an understanding that in a poll context, sometimes the answers to a poll in one question can be influenced by questions leading up to that question.
I agree with
think there
you.
was an effort to say, well, you've sort of influenced the result of question 40 by questions 30 through 40. So you need to release those as well. But if 40, 41, 42, 43, 44 all relate to your popularity, then I would argue those should all be released. Because those are all to the extent the results of the questions were disclosed. Well, you disclosed you were ahead 60-40. Well, all four of those questions relate to whether you were ahead 60-40. So I don't agree with you that this rule would not require release of those. I think what the opinion was trying to do, though, was it was trying to.
I agree with you in that
In a real world
definition.
situation, polls are not these small, discrete type of questions that are sometimes released to the public, and it's not necessarily fair to other candidates who were in the poll that one candidate released, and oh my God, now all my stuff's out there too.
I would agree with you in that description, that entire poll should not be released. However, I think that the definitions that we got, preparatory meant before, and that's what we heard over and over and over again by one of the candidates. Mm-hmm. So that in the description now, the language, I think the language can be rewritten to say what we're both discussing should be should resolve the issue, but I don't think it's here now. And I think that to make it fair, it should say that any descriptive questions or questions in response to the particular candidate should be released and should be filed. I mean, I think that that's what, I think that the language, and again, I can only speak from experience of what happened in. Now, I have other issues. I did say that I don't believe that the statute allows counsel's office as opposed to whoever the chief enforcement counsel because of 3-1041B, I believe, gave the authority to the chief enforcement counsel to do all investigations. And I don't, my other,
We should stay on
This
that one
doesn't
before we
change
move
that.
on, if we
Yeah,
could.
this doesn't change that.
I mean, you can go to the other one, but I think if we take.
Stay on where we were before.
okay, and that,
Well, I think we should respond to that one, but I also want to respond to the first part too.
Yeah.
okay.
I'm sorry.
So I don't, you know,
I apologize.
I mean, on the first part, I think it's a mischaracterization that the proposed reg, which is only proposed to get comments at this point, it's not an emergency adoption of anything, is to try and put order to last fall's process, which was not as orderly as we would like. The commissioners made clear that the 84 opinion still stands, and I agree with the comments of Commissioner Kozinski. The words of the opinion in total deal with both preparatory questions, but also questions or parts of the poll that reflect on the question that was, or the facts, whatever they were, that were released to the press. I think it's consistent with what the people involved in that poll of last fall said to us repeatedly, even though it was just said a few moments ago. I disagree with, because we did release only parts of that poll. We didn't see all of it, but the parts that we did release, some of it really wasn't. I mean, it's hard to release that which you don't see to know whether or not it's truly part of the opinion. We tried to set up a process that was orderly, that provided due process, but quickly, so that we could get to the information timely before the election was over, which is the purpose of trying to put some order to this. Certainly, transparency. Our goal is to have order and a neutral party, so to speak, to be able to review this material, to get to that very kind of question that's been the dialogue that's been back and forth, is does what was released to the press have anything to do with whether it's an 80-question survey or a 10-question survey, and how much of it really needs to be released, and it all depends on what was said and what's in the poll. So the purpose of the regulation is not to take away any investigatory rights. I think that's the second part of the question, but the purpose was to make it an orderly process, a quicker process, that persons filing complaints have some, real organization as to what are the process that will be followed. We're not making it up as we go. So certainly, as we put it out for comments, we may have to make amendments to.
Yeah,
So the purpose of it, I think, was not to make it less transparent. It certainly was to provide as much transparency as we can to get the answers out before election is over.
That may be. But I just heard the commissioner and Reason saying the same exact thing of what they want in the poll. Now, if the only problem is how each one is interpreting what's written, why don't we just write something that says that? I mean, that's very simple, because you're saying the same thing.
And, I mean,
It could be. I think it says it, I have to say,
No,
but if
my point-
there needs
my
to be
point,
clarification,
Commissioner,
I'm
is-
okay with that.
My point, Commissioner, is, so what? She doesn't understand it that way. Maybe I don't. Maybe she doesn't.
Well,
I just make it clearer, that's all.
I think that's fine.
That's fine.
I think that at this point, we're just putting it out for public comment.
I understand.
So we should put it out for public comment. Risa can write up the language that she thinks ought to go in there so that we have that actual language. And we'll look at it.
My question
And we'll
is-
also get comments from both the press and the political community on what they think is appropriate on how we should deal with this.
Yeah, I
And
don't think
look
there's
forward
anything
to
in
those
here that really
comments, I think.
changes the current rules. I think this is meant to really memorialize the opinion that was put out in '84 and the statute and regulation as it currently exists. So I don't think this changes anything. No,
And
we
to
want to change
clarify that
something.
the hearing officer is not the same as the investigator.
Right.
My
Right.
question is, if you change the language, does it have to go out again for public comment? And if it does, why don't we?
It's shorter
change-
comment, and we'll do better by getting comments and then making a revision than to just delay it until, well, I think we're
I mean, I'm
better
okay
off.
putting it out, getting public
Yeah.
comments. If we need to make changes, we'll make changes.
Yeah.
And if we need to put it out again, we do. I mean, I don't think we're adverse to that. That's sort of my feeling.
If you look at when our next board meeting may be, most of the comment period probably will be over by the time the next board meeting. And we could at least have the benefit of comments. If we have to go back out, it's another 30 days. It's not, I don't, unless there's a poll that comes out in relation to the special elections, I think we have a little bit of time before we get to the September primary that
Well,
we
we
could
have a
probably.
process in place right now if we need to use it. It's not like nothing exists, so we could use the current process. It's not perfect, I agree, but it's something. This is certainly meant to improve it, and I think it does. So
I'm sorry.
I think we should put it out, elicit comments from everybody that wants to comment, and then take another look at it after those comments come in and make adjustments as necessary.
Well, we have a situation in place, now that we've had this discussion, where we all understand what this means. When we look at the situation that's in place while we're waiting for this, we can operate under the framework we understand.
Okay.
I think maybe Mr. Quayle could comment on the second part, because I think it's an important
Second
point. Well, Risa had mentioned the 3104 section. I think there's a little bit of difference that doesn't really remove any investigatory, but this is a slightly different process, which still has that component.
Right.
Can have that component.
The effort in making the revision was to have the adjudicatory function go to the hearing officers, and they have been performing that adjudicatory function under 6218 with respect to other matters that have come up and through 3104. And it sort of changes this process into more of a process where the complainant is in the driver's seat with respect to their complaint and making the case as to the propriety of the release as opposed to the respondent. The language in the regulation that permits the board to act on its own and to conduct an investigation is left, and in that context where the regulation says the State Board of Elections, that clearly still means the Enforcement Council. It's the adjudicatory portion only that's shifting. And certainly, as the comment period unfolds, if there's specific issues where we may have missed some piece of nuance with respect to that, then we can bring that back to the commissioners and address it too at the end of the comment period.
Okay.
And my only other question is whether SAPA would apply to these hearings, so that the time periods would be required to be within SAPA, which would be, the issues of the reasonableness under the hearings. And I know that the truncated the time periods for those filed within 30 days of the election would require that, but there are certain things that are required under SAPA, which would be evidence necessary, and the confidentiality, which is what happened with in the Jones matter, the request and requirement by the board, and in this in the regulation to keep the poll confidential should it be turned over to a hearing officer. If it's done under SAPA, that might be an issue. It was certainly an issue for me conducting the hearing because the commissioners wanted the poll to be confidential. It sort of had to be a hybrid of that, because if it was actually a SAPA hearing, the poll would have had to be marked as a piece of evidence, and the complainant in this situation would have been entitled to a copy of the full poll. So that's just another consideration for the period of time that the public comment. So that's another issue just to consider, the confidentiality and the SAPA requirements of the evidence.
And I think in general, the provisions of this regulation are compliant with Article 3 of SAPA in terms of the procedural requirements. They tend to be fairly broad. They do certainly require reasonableness. And there are some very specific things that SAPA requires that are not spelled out in this regulation, where if SAPA applies, you simply do what SAPA says. So it works. With respect to confidentiality, it's certainly an issue that we can look at, but generally speaking, it was when there's a source of law that provides a superseding provision for something to be confidential, then you have something that makes it confidential and you can follow it. What we lack presently is that in the current regulation, it's not particularly well spelled out. We do have some vague language about providing something that should be kept confidential. This spells it out in greater detail, and I think when you overlay this procedure with SAPA requirements, that we won't find there to be inherent conflicts, but certainly if there's specific examples where there may be, happy to take a look at those.
It's an issue that I resolved to keep the poll confidential because that's what the commissioners wanted. It's just an issue that I raise in the.
It's one of the reasons that for revising the regulation was because we need to explicitly provide for confidentiality, which wasn't provided previously. But I think we should publish it, and then
I
we
agree.
should
I
review the
agree.
comments.
I agree.
And this is only a draft for public comment at this point.
Yeah, I would move we put it out for public comment.
All right. Those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, then the next one, also to publish for public comment, are revisions to Part 6216 relating to the HAVA complaint procedure. And does anybody want to speak to that? Or are we ready to just vote?
I think in general, the purpose, having done several of these, is to try and facilitate persons with disability wishing to file a complaint to remove some of the
To streamline the process.
some of the steps along the way.
All right, and so we ready to vote?
Yep. Moves, I'll second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Again, this is just for public comment, right?
Right. Correct. All right, and then the third is a resolution to put out for public comment proposed changes to Part 6200. This regulation, or this addition to the regulation is being proposed because of a statute that was just adopted by the legislature that provides a procedure for removing campaign committee treasurer, and the board would update its regulations to conform to the new statute.
I noticed Risa had some comments on this too.
Yes, I just had a couple of questions that, about the wording. Under the when you're talking about the designation by a multi-candidate committee, it says that they're making a joint designation. I didn't understand what that meant, whether it was, what joint meant, whether it was unanimous. Does it mean unanimous of all of the candidates? I don't know what the definition of joint means.
So what I would point out is that what the sentence says is that a treasurer removal committee for a political committee authorized by more than one candidate. So that's a typical multi-candidate committee. The treasurer removal committee for a political committee authorized by more than one candidate is designated when all candidates authorizing such committee make a joint designation. So the joint designation is sort of modified by the all candidates who authorize the committee making the designation.
So
So it would mean,
So
so it would be
that
all of
does
them.
mean unanimous.
Yep, it would be unanimous at the time. And then what the regulation attempts to provide for a carve-out is that if the multi-candidate committee designates an additional candidate after the treasurer removal committee has been created, the additional candidates authorization of the multi-candidate committee would not void the treasurer removal committee that's in place when that happens. So the committee does not need to redo the treasurer designation at that time.
So that's what the second clause means?
That's what the provided however clause means.
The removal of subsequent author. Okay, so that means when if there are an additional candidates,
We
I
used
think it
to-
basically means if the committee removes, and let's say the treasurer goes and complains to one, they can't then authorize another
you
one
just-
in addition.
I think you just said different things.
I'm not sure we said different things. Did we say different things?
Candidate
The-
comes
well,
on,
if-
he can
You just said
No, no,
different
no, no,
things.
if one of the same candidates.
No, you just said different, you just said different things.
What I so would it?
That's why I was,
If the candidate, if the committee is authorized by additional candidates, that additional candidate being authorized wouldn't void a removal of a treasurer that had already occurred. And
So-
it was written differently and then it changed to the current
All right,
iteration
so-
of the, but that's the objective.
so you start out with 3 candidates, and now
Right.
you have 5.
Right. And when the,
2 additional candidates doesn't void the
Exactly.
removal of the treasurer.
Right,
But that's not what you just said.
well, that's what I meant.
and now we're on the same page.
Okay.
You can't
Wow.
you can't do an end run around the committee.
But the key thing is what the text of the regulation says and not what people say here.
Okay, so
You got a lot of
Always-
comments.
always the case.
the removal of a treasurer by such committee shall not be canceled by the subsequent authorization of that treasurer by one or more other candidates.
That's what she said too.
Well, certainly we'll-
They said it in different
I
ways.
think the
Yeah.
question is, who's that treasurer? Who is that?
The one removed.
The one removed or the one substituted?
So,
When you say that treasurer, by a of that treasurer. So that means if the removed treasurer is authorized by the new candidate, that treasurer doesn't get back in.
Right.
Is that what you're trying to say?
Still out.
Okay. Fair enough.
This is me, I'm a candidate, I can't just go, you're fired?
Correct.
Well,
You can't-
there's really no process
no
right
process
now under
for it.
law to do that, no.
No?
And if you don't
That's
elect,
what made this arise.
and if you don't elect to
Which there should
create
be.
a
But,
a
committee,
3-person
you
committee.
still can't do that.
Got it.
yeah, treasurers can actually refuse
Yeah.
All right.
the
submit-
candidate,
they-
and there's really no
they have.
mechanism in law to force them out. That's why this was
Many
done. Yeah,
times
is
they've
that
gone
rule?
rogue and you can't get them to quit,
I've
Yeah.
never had that problem.
or turn over the books or anything.
Yeah,
Usually you can't get them to stay.
You're right.
so, it's meant to address that, you're right.
Okay, and then just the 3rd paragraph. A copy of the writing removing and/or appointing a treasurer shall be provided by the treasurer to the removed treasurer. Okay, and then in the middle of the paragraph, it says, or actually the second to last sentence on the page, the removal notice shall. I mean, you don't mention that removal, is that the copy of the writing, the removal notice?
Yes, and so what paragraph, I'll call it paragraph, I'll call it section. Section 3 here does is it requires that a writing be provided to the removed treasurer that sort of outlines the obligations that that individual has upon being removed. And then, after setting out what all those are, it says the removal notice shall state the requirements of this paragraph clearly and concisely and be provided on a form prescribed by the state board. So it is referring to the same document.
Which we're gonna create.
Right, and it currently says the removal notice. It could be changed to read such notification or such writing, if there was concern about it being ambiguous. But the only thing that's being talked about here in the section on responsibility is the removed treasurer, in terms of making sure that the removed treasurer gets this notice.
Well,
it seems
maybe
in context that it's the removal
The
notice. but-
point is that you should use the same words throughout to describe the same.
Yeah, or
document.
just use
So call it the
removal
removal
notice
notice at the beginning.
at the beginning,
Yeah.
right.
Well,
But
again, can we put this out?
I agree.
And then make these changes
And-
Okay.
and that-
Yeah,
comment
just,
period?
just
And
make
that's a
it,
kind
Pretty
of
minor,
change
right?
that,
Yeah.
minor changes don't
So I
require real.
would move that we get these out.
Good.
And then we'll
I
make
agree.
those changes as needed during
Sounds
the
like a
comment
plan.
period. So I'd make that motion.
All right, those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, unanimously adopted. Then we have a resolution 1703, which provides for the appointment of 3 additional hearing officers.
no, reappoint.
Reappoint.
A reappointment of the 3. Okay. All right, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And I think, Bob, you mentioned that we're also looking to,
Well, we had 5. One moved on to something else, we were down to 4, and, they're appointed for a 2-year term. When staff reached out, the 4th one thought it was something he needed to move on to something else. So we're down to 3. We can function with 3, but I think we're gonna still reach out and try and go back up to 5 in case we need them ever. If we lose one of the 3, we're down to 2, and I just think, we're good for now, and we will probably come back to you after that effort if we identify additional people. It's a continuing recruitment.
So what are they used for right now? What do we use them for, these hearing officers? We use them for HAVA complaints?
complaints.
Is that all?
No, we don't.
Well, we
And the-
propose to
We
use
use them
them.
for
enforcement.
6218.
last year,
And your enforcement hearings as well?
so last year there were 11 enforcement hearing applications, and 3 of them were withdrawn, so that there were.
The poll.
No, there were
Okay.
6,
Eight
Poll.
proceedings.
So you use them for
altogether.
your hearings, you use them for HAVA, and then,
Not HAVA, we propose to use them for the poll.
oh, you don't use them for HAVA, I'm sorry, you do the HAVA hearings, I'm sorry. Okay, so we do those ourselves. So we only use them right now for
Compliance.
compliance hearings, and we're gonna,
enforcement here.
enforcement hearings.
Enforcement
Civil
to
enforcement.
comply.
So we can
Okay.
get by on 3.
Okay.
And
Okay, and we're gonna expand it arguably, to
Well,
the-
whenever we get a
Fair enough.
spinning the wheel, one of the processes is there a conflict? So who knows what is gonna come up? There may be a conflict.
Okay.
It's good to have a pool to pick from. 3 is good, we're working on.
all right, so resolution 17-03 was adopted unanimously. And then the next is 1704, which is the resolution authorizing expenditure of a sum not to exceed $650,000 from the State Operations HAVA Fund for the payment of the costs associated with the Nysboe Research Project, which, refresh project, okay. Which Mr. Cross talked about before. All right, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Before we go into executive session now, I have only personnel, there's no
That's it.
enforcement, right?
Correct.
Okay. And you guys really want that in executive
It's up to
session?
you.
It's up to you.
You did it in executive last time, so
Well, it's really up to,
I have a draft that I gave you.
all
I
right.
have another draft.
The resolution is to authorize the co-executive directors to receive the 2017 Uniform State Agency Management Confidential Salary Adjustments. I mean, if we want to discuss it, we could go
So
into
moved.
executive session.
Second.
Okay. All right, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, so we don't have any
We
executive
have no
session
executive session
agenda.
then.
We should talk about our next meeting. My thought was May 31st or June 1st.
Hold on just a second.
What is June 1st? What is
That's a Wednesday or a Thursday.
May 31st.
When's Memorial Day, that Monday?
29.
Correct.
Monday, correct.
June 1st is better for me.
Good.
June 1st.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
All right, so we're
And just on your,
tentatively,
on your clocks, maybe for the next meeting, we need to meet, the only one we need to do is approximately July 31st to August 4th, in case there are any petition determinations with this year's filing, so we can certify. We also have to certify the questions for the constitutional, the publications. So,
Can we set
so
that
that's what
now?
we have to.
yeah, let's pick
Well,
a date
set
now.
So what are we doing
It's
now?
up to you.
What dates?
What do you have for
We
the
need to meet
first
some-
week of August?
July 31st to August 4th. August 4th is Friday. The 31st.
So that week we need to
is-
meet.
So maybe Wednesday, the 2nd?
Where are we now? We're in
August, July 31st.
July?
Is the Monday of that week.
Right, okay.
So it's that week. You're suggesting what? The 2nd?
That's fine.
You
August
suggested
2nd?
the Wednesday.
August 2nd is a Wednesday, that's fine.
And that's August what?
2nd.
Second.
So we're talking about meeting June 1st
And August 2nd.
and August 2nd.
If you need to do any more, but the August one is when we have to do.
Okay. And I'm
What was
sorry,
the-
when's the
other one was
conference again?
June, you said?
June
I'm sorry, I
1st.
apologize.
June 20th through the 23rd in Lake Placid.
Okay, got it.
So we have a June date of
June
June 1st.
June 1. June 1.
The next one is August.
August 2nd.
Got it.
August 2.
All right,
So
so,
we'd skip July.
What's the deadline on
Yeah, good. Where anyway?
May 15th.
we could meet later in June if you want.
No,
We can talk about that if we want to. I don't, yeah.
All right, so those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
All right, so stand adjourned.
Pretty good.
Great.
Good. It wasn't 10 minutes, but it wasn't bad.